Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here by very popular demand. And I just don't for the life of me understand why. I mean, who wants this sort of thing? But you asked for it, and who am I to deny you what you want? The 12 most annoying conductors ever! Now, actually, the way you phrased it was the worst conductors ever. But the truth of the matter is, I think annoying is a more appropriate way to phrase it. Because every conductor, no matter how wretched, usually does one or two good things. And you'll point them out. I'll say, well, so-and-so sucks. You'll say, oh, yes, but he did a great recording of work. Blech. Well, that doesn't matter. What matters is consistency. Consistent greatness over time. That's what we're looking for. And when I say annoying, I mean least likely to give pleasure, most inconsistent, frustrating, sometimes downright incompetent. Of course it happens. But overall, these are the ones who are just a waste of time and money. And that's really, I think, where the issue is, on recordings, because you have choice. And you have choice in all of the things these people record. And you may want to pick one or two things that they did that are outstanding or that have gotten a certain level of acclaim. And then you can ignore the rest because they're annoying. So, here's the list. You ready? Number one, and most recent, I think, Teodor Currentzis. Well, he's actually sort of on the outs now since he was a big Putin supporter, and there's a little bit of schadenfreude there. I can't help it. But the fact of the matter is, talk about pretentious and overhyped. And as usual, the Germans just went for it, hook, line, and sinker in Stuttgart. Come on. And then you listen to his recordings, and they are micromanaged, over-rehearsed, absolutely rigid and completely uninteresting, aside from certain perversities that he may take. He started out doing a couple good things for Alpha. Again, see, this is the point. There's a good Shostakovich 14th. Mozart Requiem was not atrocious, I don't think. Sort of, who knows. But very quickly became so full of himself. And if you look at his website, he's one of those people who bills himself, and there are a couple here, as not just a conductor. He's a conductor, a singer, a dancer, a fashion model, a poet, one of these just agglomerating every pretentious thing he possibly can to himself. Anyway, but what matters is his music making. And the music making with his orchestra up in Permafrost, up in Perm in Russia, is okay. But there's always something wrong. Always something wrong, because he can't get out of his own way. He's one of the most fearful, desperate people I have ever heard pick up a baton. He is so desperate to make an impression and to do something. And that we don't need. We just don't need that. We need people who just love music and play it accordingly. So Teodor Currentzis is number one on my list, but he seems to be, like I said, sidelined for the moment. We shall see what emerges anon, because he will. People like that are like, a herpy. They always come back. So we'll have to wait and see. Anyway, Simon Rattle. Oh my goodness. Well, you know how I feel about Simon Rattle. I felt the same way about Simon Rattle since Simon Rattle was Simon Rattle. Actually, it's not true. When he started out with the Philharmonian, he did this sort of a really beautiful Sibelius Fifth, kind of slowish and interesting. His first recording of Rachmaninoff's symphonic dances, some other things. He was a fresh young conductor doing some good things, some bad things, but with lots of promise. Then he went to Birmingham, and he became, thanks to the British press, the greatest thing since sliced bread, and he never was. He never was. The problem with Simon Rattle isn't that he's actually bad. Sometimes he's bad. It's that he's never really great. He was never the, poster child for British musical glory that he's been made out to be. And now that, of course, he's sort of turned his back and sniffed at the English government and Brexit and all that stuff. I mean, now he's really in a tough corner because he has to be, apostrophized and exalted as the, elder statesman of English music or English musical conducting or something like that. But at the same time, he's no longer politically all that desirable. So it's kind of an interesting situation for him. But again, the point is the music. And he's made scads and scads and scads of records. And I've been very happy when they've been very good. Some of them have been. His Mahler 10, both of them actually. The Dvorak symphonic poems, all of his Szymanowski, some more Rachmaninoff. I mean, he can do beautiful things. But the good stuff is a tiny, 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 tiny fraction of the junk. And so, again, if the issue is consistency of listening pleasure over time, I'm happy to sort through all the crap and pick out the jewels. And that's what we can do. We can enjoy those. But let's not kid ourselves. Chances are, when you get a new Simon Rattle recording, you are not getting anything that's particularly wonderful. And that's a shame. It's just a pity, but it's the truth. So Simon Rattle is definitely on the list of most annoying conductors based on his output and his achievement to date. Next, oh my, Sergiu Celibidache. Oh, God, talk about someone who's got a low batting average. His Bruckner, you can argue, is fabulous. Some of it. Not even all of that, but most of it is fascinating because it's so slow. And there are other things he did where the slow, micromanaged, demented approach is kind of fun. Debussy's La Mer, Pictures at an Exhibition. There are a couple other things that's really interesting. But the guy was just such a pompous ass, and musically a pompous ass. I mean, his interpretations are virtually unlistenable in the classical repertoire. Beethoven, Brahms, and those people. Schumann, God knows what else. And even in the romantic repertoire, he was a chord guy. And we'll be talking about those a little bit more in another video. He was one note at a time. Everything had to be studied and rehearsed to the point of dissipation. And so, people tolerate him. They fall under his Svengali-like sway and enjoy listening to music at half speed. And, if that's your thing, go ahead. But, the irony is, with a lot of people that are like that, like Celibidache, like these, and Currentzis is another one, the ones who are super, super controlling, is that they're never controlling enough. In other words, something's always going to get away from them. It always does. There are mistakes. There's ensemble issues. And so the legendary perfection is a myth. It's a total myth. I have a couple examples of that where you see that happen. One of them was when I went to see Philip Glass's music in 12 parts. Music which really can't be performed live because it's so repetitious and it needs to be done with absolute mechanical precision if it's going to make its point. But in reality, it's impossible to perform it that way because they're human beings and they need to rest and they have their fallibilities. And I remember, going to see the whole thing, and all I thought was, okay, it's fine, but it wasn't perfectly inhuman, which is what it was supposed to be. And it sounded far too human as far as I was concerned. I've always had that same feeling when I go see ballet productions, classical ballet, where you have the corps de ballet, and you've got, 50 women all dressed in identical tutus. They all come out looking identical. Well, they're never quite identical. Some are taller, some are shorter. They're all trying to do the same thing. It's never quite in unison. I mean, like alien, inhuman unison, which is what it's supposed to be. And so these people, these legendary perfectionists, never live up to the perfectionism that they so frequently tout. And so I think they're frauds. They really are. And for that reason, they are annoying, despite having made a few fabulous or revelatory things. I see a lot of this in the comments. We talk about these people and you say, oh, well, he belongs in the top 20 because he did the greatest performance of Bach. Well, so what? What about all the not so great performances of the other 500 recordings they made? You have to look at the sum total of their career. So Celibidache is a, who are they kidding? Anyway, Celibidache. Then we've got Roger Norrington. Well, what do I need to say about Roger Norrington? Roger Norrington was a phony from the very beginning. He remains a phony. He will always be a phony. His musicality is suspect in a lot of repertoire. After like Schutz, he founded the Schutz Choir. Maybe he did some good Schutz. I wouldn't deny him his Schutz. But after that, oh my God. I mean, and the scholarly apparatus that he has dragged with him throughout his career based on fictitious notions of the way things might have sounded back in the day, and people just swallowed it. Hook, line, and sinker. It's our fault. We enabled him. The classical music universe, and we are enablers. And he's dreadful. I can say that. I've been saying that for decades, and that's the way it goes. So then Yevgeny Svetlanov, here's another winner. Yeah, well, he's recorded just about the entire Russian orchestral repertoire, and he did it for Melodia in often really grotty sound, which wasn't necessarily his fault, but the sound of the orchestra, well, that sort of was his fault. And these orchestras were just screechy, paint-peeling, ear-splittingly vulgar. I mean, a lot of it's fun. I mean, it really was. And later in his career, when he got really good sound from Exton or, from the Japanese, and he redid his Tchaikovsky symphonies twice, actually, live and then also in studio, and some other things like that, Rachmaninoff, and he sort of got slower and heavier, but also bigger. And, his interpretations kind of, well, he was like a red giant, they swelled, consumed the outer planets and grew into the otiosity. I mean, or just the vulgar bombast of his interpretations. Actually, some of those are great. I mean, those records are great and fun and exciting as hell. Oh my gosh. I mean, he was raw. He was sort of the Georg Schulte of Russia. It's just wham, bam, thank you, bam. But oh my God, so much of it is just bad. And you don't know what you're going to get. It all depends on what you're going to get. And I've praised a lot of Svetlanov's stuff because I've enjoyed it enormously. But there's a huge body of really subpar work. And he didn't have much competition because he was well connected politically. So he got to do all of this stuff. And it was probably more than he really should have. And I find him to be definitely one of the most annoying, because one of the most inconsistent conductors. It was very funny when he wound up doing some recordings in the UK with, like, what was it, with the Philharmonia or whatever. He did Scheherazade, stuff like that. And it was just the opposite of what it was in Russia. I mean, in Russia, it was loud and noisy and screaming and screechy and pulverizing and insensitive. And then, when he had a calmer orchestra, it was lethargic and thick and lazy and languorous and really very, very strange. Very, very strange guy. But there are lots of records. Next, oh God, Adam Fischer. Well, here you've got a family issue because he's competing with his brother, Ivan, who's got the Budapest Festival Orchestra and is a very, very fine conductor, an excellent conductor. And Adam, poor old Adam, he started out, remember, doing like Bartok orchestral music on Nimbus, which wasn't bad, actually. It really wasn't. Then he did all the Haydn symphonies, and a lot of those were pretty good. But since then, holy cow! I mean, he did a Mozart symphony cycle, which I also thought was very good. Actually, I thought it was the best one out there for a while. But his Haydn remakes have been awful. Oh my goodness! And then Brahms and Beethoven with this tiny orchestra, and again the period instrument of flatus, over which he imposes his own bizarre interpretive notions to try and personalize the whole thing. And it's just maddeningly irritating. It really is. I get stuck even thinking about it. His Haydn London symphonies, his latest things, were just abominable. But his Brahms and Beethoven were also dreadful, and it's a shame because he had a rather nice thing going. But like so many of these people, they become excessively controlling. They pay attention only to details, never to the big picture of, a work or a movement. It's just a series of sound effects and manipulations and tiny little annoyances. They don't play the music. They poke at it. They just irritate it. Ugh, yuck. So he's definitely on the list of most annoying conductors ever. And he's a recent addition to it. This is his later career where he's sort of, gone to pieces that way. And that's such a shame. Really a shame. Yes. Reginald Goodall. Reggie. Well, Reginald Goodall, let's be honest. He's not a conductor at all. He's a repetiteur. He's a rehearsal pianist. That's what he is. That's what he was. That's what he was good for. He did do a decent Tristan and Isolde. Some people like his Meistersinger too. He's a Wagner specialist. Everything else that he's ever done has been just horrid to the extent that we've heard it. And you can see my reviews on ClassicsToday.com. They thought that because he did Wagner, he'd be good at Bruckner. Big mistake! Oh, no. No, Reggie was not there at all. And his Wagner, he's just along for the ride. Occasionally he can wake up and do something, but he's sort of a living example of just how well composed Wagner is, because it actually works better in some cases without any conductor at all. The conductor just gets in the way and messes things up. And Wagner, I think, for all that conductors have hitched their wagon to Wagner, at the end of the day, Wagner is still an opera composer. 90% of his music is an accompaniment. The singers still matter, and you'll get credit for the noise everybody makes if you're there. But seriously, that this guy actually had a career, even doing Wagner in English, is really a testament to the lack of standards prevailing in the musical world in the UK at the time, number one, and number two, to people's tolerance for foolishness. Because in music, as you always, people never tire of telling me, well, it's all subjective. Well, it's only subjective to the extent that you don't have standards. It's only subjective to the extent that people don't listen, that they don't agree on easily audible facts. And Goodall is one of those guys who sort of slipped between the cracks of great music making, and there he is. But he didn't do too much, so, we can only be mildly annoyed with him, because, frankly, to be severely annoyed with him would be to expend vastly more emotional energy than his performances generate, and he's worth as an artist. So there you go. After Goodall is another one, Jascha Horenstein. Okay, there's a Horenstein cult. Cults are awful uniformly because a cult is the opposite of standards. Cults just say, well, everything my cult fan guru does is amazing, and therefore everything is equally fabulous, and therefore I shut off my brain, I put my discernment in neutral, and I simply sit there like a helpless lemming sucking in the glory allegedly issuing forth from the artistic bowels of my hero. Well, Horenstein had lots of artistic bowels, and honestly, my good friend Christoph from Le Devoir always said Horenstein was noteworthy, and that every orchestra he ever worked with made their worst recording with him, and he's right. He made a lot of crappy stuff for Vox early in his career. Then he did a lot of Reader's Digest work, some of which wasn't bad at all. He never really had a serious A&R program, artist and repertoire. That's what A&R stands for. And at the time, he did repertoire that wasn't being done very much. He was a Mahler guy in the UK when people weren't doing Mahler. So his eighth was historically interesting and important, and his third and his first and fourth, he did those. And then, he did some Bruckner very, very well. And then he did the standard romantic stuff, most of which just sucked beyond belief. His greatest recordings were his Rachmaninoff Concerti with Earl Wild, because they played off of each other fabulously. Horenstein was famously rigid. He didn't change tempos. He just started and went like a metronome, usually all the way through a movement. And in Rachmaninoff, you have this incredibly romantic virtuoso whose playing is completely spontaneous and fresh. And you have a conductor who provides a framework, a really powerful framework within that operate. So give him credit for it. I do. But that's the problem. You hear a couple good things. I mean, I was like most of you. I got that Mahler 3 because there weren't that many of them. I got some of these other things. I thought, oh, this is terrific. It's an alternative view. And then you listen more and more to his catalog, and it gets worse and worse and worse and worse. It just gets awful, almost uniformly. And then you realize, after all the other stuff that's come out since, that the stuff you originally liked wasn't so hot either. And the whole thing winds up disappointing, except that Rachmaninoff. So Horenstein's definitely one of the most annoying conductors ever. Then, we'd have to turn to the period instrument people. There are a bunch of those, but Andrew Parrott gets my vote. Now, Andrew Parrott, remember, founded the Taverner Consort and Players, or whatever they were, or choir, or whatever they were. Parrott has a special place in my list of annoying conductors because he was annoying to me personally, which had nothing to do with me, actually. This is a true story. Some of you I may have told it before, but some of you have wondered how I got into my musicology vibrato kick, and all that stuff that I've ceaselessly pointed out, that the period instrument people have no clue what they're talking about when it comes to that topic, and I have the evidence that proves it. Well, that all got started because I wrote a review of the Ronald Broughtigam bis recording of Beethoven's Third Piano Concerto with Andrew Parrott was conducting. It was like with Malmo Symphony Orchestra or something, and Broughtigam. And I gave it like a 9 out of 10. I mean, I liked it a lot, except I said in the slow movement, the strings sounded scratchy because, of course, he wasn't letting them play with vibrato. And it was, that beautiful slow movement to be warm and lovely, and it was kind of scrappy sounding. Well, I got an email from the Parrott himself saying, who the hell are you to criticize the string playing in this recording? What do you know? I'm a scholar. I know all this stuff about performance practice. It was one of these, in a manner of speaking. I haven't saved the email, so I can only paraphrase what it said. But it was basically, screw you. I know what I'm talking about. You don't know anything, etc. And I said to myself, okay, let's get to the truth, shall we? And I proceeded to write 600 pages, 3 essays on the history of vibrato and performance with evidence, research, and everything. It was these big, wordy, blowhard essay things. But a lot of the evidence and material that I wanted to use was in them. They're still out there on the internet somewhere. I don't know. I took them down. They were up on Classics Today for a while. And it was just an endless pile of verbiage. And an actual musical scholar, her name was Styra Avens. Her name is Styra Avens. She's still out there, and she's lovely. And she's a Brahms scholar. And she wrote to me, and she said, oh, my goodness, you really ought to put this in some sort of shape and have it published because you are so on top of it. You're so right. And so I did. And I've had, half a dozen scholarly articles on this topic and other performance practice issues published since then in peer-reviewed journals, all of which demonstrate, I think, pretty specifically that Andrew Parrott and his ilk were full of crap when it came to their claim, at least on that issue, of any special knowledge based on serious research or, God forbid, musical understanding. Anyway, so, but way before then, I felt that Parrott was an annoying character because he got started back when the, early music thing was happening with the major labels. And he was part of the English early music mafia, which was, a bunch of people in London, all of whom were the same players that changed their name depending on who the head guy was. So you had the Academy of Ancient Music, and you had the English Concert, you had the London Classical Players, and you had the Monteverdi people, and you had the Taverner Consort. It's like the same group of people. And it just depended what guy had them. And so every label had their period instrument people, right? So you had Hogwood was on Loiselier, and Pinnock was on Archive. So was Goebel, that was in Germany. So they were they were the German wing. And of course you had John Eliot Gardner. At that point he was on Phillips and Erato, and all these people. And so EMI at the time, Virgin Veritas specifically, their sublabel, wanted period instrument stuff, and they used Andrew Parrott. He was their flavor of the month early music guy. Now, he had studied with Joshua Rifkin. Remember him? The 1-2 apart Bach guy? He worked with him. And so his great contribution to the period instrument movement was to do it with lesser, fewer, more anemic. I mean, the guy, well, he's musical anemia, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, it's just bloodless, tinny, uninteresting music making in early music. And it was stuff that everybody else was doing. He actually focused on some of the earlier things a little bit. It was a little bit earlier before he decided to mistakenly do classical repertoire on Bis with Ronald Brautigam. And so he made a bunch of records of no special interest or value, in my view. And so he was already an also-ran by the time he started to apply his misconceived ideas to the performance of Beethoven. And so I find him to be one of the most annoying conductors ever, in addition to being, kind of nasty. So there was that. Then we've got, okay, let's forget these early music people. Hans Knappertsbusch. Good old Hans. Talk about inconsistent. Holy crap. Hated to rehearse. I don't know if he even liked to conduct very much, if he had to move. Famous only for Wagner, and Parsifal in particular. And he did a couple great recordings of Parsifal. He did. And there's some good things in his ring. I mean, there's always good things in his opera stuff. But again, opera is a special world. It's accompaniment. And if you've got great singers, you can be kind of slovenly and lackadaisical, and, and the singing can be marvelous if they hold it together. And sometimes you wake up and you hold it together. And sometimes he did. But then he accompanied people. He did the Curzon Beethoven Emperor with the Vienna Philharmonic sounding like, well, they were as asleep as Knappertsbusch was, and other music. And there were scads of live performances being issued of things that were so embarrassing that you just couldn't believe the guy had a career. You really couldn't. People will love certain things that he did. But taken as a whole, he is without question one of the most annoying conductors ever. Certainly annoying. And then we've got this new guy on Gramola, Rémy Ballot. Rémy Ballot is oh, gee whiz. He's trying to out Celibidache, doing Bruckner symphonies at 1/8 tempo, as opposed to merely 1/4 tempo, with a youth orchestra in crappy sound. It's embarrassing. It's the kind of thing that would never merit any kind of international exposure or release back in the older days when there were just a few labels and they had the biggest artists, because what he's doing is local in the worst sense. He's a provincial. And I mean that in the most eloquent and serious meaning of the term. In other words, something out in Austria somewhere where people who have absolutely nothing better to do with their time will go on a Sunday and sit for hours listening to this narcissist just advertise himself with a band of helpless kids who are trapped, the Bruckner Youth Orchestra, whatever it is, and they have to follow this guy. And they're probably scarred for life musically. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me a bit. I mean, we used to see things like that here. Remember, who was the guy's name? Taboris was his name, with Mid America Productions. Peter Taboris. Nice guy, actually, he was. And he would get high school choirs from all over the United States, and he would get them to pay money. They had to pay to come to Carnegie Hall and give a concert. And sometimes he would conduct, and at other points, he would have guest conductors come and do things, and they would do these big choral extravaganzas, and they would fill up Carnegie Hall because these kids would come and they would bring their parents and their grandparents and their brothers and sisters, and they would all buy tickets. And it was a wonderful time for them. I mean, I played in the orchestra for some of these productions. That's how I know. I know all about it. I was sitting there in the back chatting with the people from, Nebraska, wherever they came from, and lovely people and lots of fun. And they had a great time. And it was wonderful. And it was a lovely, lovely thing to do. It really was. And I'm sure that the Bruckner Youth Orchestra or whoever else Ballot's got hanging there is good too, having a good time as well. But the fact of the matter is, no one ever suggested that these things should be recorded and released internationally to the musical world at large. I mean, Peter Taboris did do some things. He actually did, but that got released. But that was different. I mean, those were special projects. But to do basic repertoire like that and offer it to the world as though it's a professional product, it's not. It's amateur hour. It really is. So he's without question one of the most annoying conductors ever to pop up recently. However, we have the king of annoyance. And some of you have mentioned him, actually. It's Maximiano Cobra. Who is Maximiano Cobra, you might ask? Well, he first popped up, I guess about 20 years ago, maybe a little bit more. He's Brazilian, sort of. And you can look at his website, where he's billed as a film producer, writer, playwright, conductor, composer. He's one of those. He's in the Teodor Currentzis League. We're kind of back to where we started a little bit. But Cobra is one of the double beat people. What are the double beat people? Well, the double beat thing is a theory by this guy. I think his name is Wim Winters or something like that. Is he Dutch? I think maybe he's Dutch. I don't know. He's from another planet. Doesn't really matter. And they came up with this idea that metronomes in Beethoven's day actually are all moving at double tempo. So we should play the music that one beat is actually a back and forth, not just a tick. It's a tick-tock. And so we should be playing everything at half speed, because that's the actual tempo it was really performed at back in the day. This ignores all of the evidence we have to the contrary. When we have timings for things, we know. And never mind the actual unbroken tradition of performance, which shows no evidence that things were speeding up unnaturally since the time at which they were written. I mean, we know some of these pieces and how long they took and what was going on, and it's all just crap. It's nonsense. And he has made, and they're on YouTube, piles of performances of symphonies by Mozart and Beethoven and Brahms. Would you like to hear the first movement of Brahms' Third take 24 minutes instead of the usual 10 or 11 with exposition repeat? Well, there's your chance. I mean, it is. I remember seeing one of the videos. He was doing a symphony. He's doing a symphony, and he had this orchestra that he hired for the occasion. And I've never seen a more unhappy group of people. I remember seeing a horn player. He's like conducting at this glacial tempo, and this guy's sitting there like this, just going like this. Okay, I'm getting paid. I'm getting paid. I'm getting paid. I mean, it's hilarious. It's a party record. And a lot of these things are, these people, these annoying people put out party records. And they're fun for a party. But life is not a party every day. You want long-term lasting pleasure, and you want a good return on your economic investment musically, don't you? And so, ultimately, these people are just what I say they are, not worth the investment, other than very, very selectively or for particular purposes. But Cobra is probably the king of the musical fraudsters, and annoying and self-promoting, and absolutely. And you just wonder, I mean, he's so oblivious to how music should sound, what makes it sound well, that either he's totally, completely, absolutely cynical, or he should be committed. I mean, I don't know what else to say about it, really. Of course, these are all just my considered opinions, but considered after a lot of listening, and I think I've provided a rationale why these folk deserve to be on the list of the 12 most annoying conductors ever. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.